Well, it's time to go back to the future, folks. The future of hunting and fishing and discussing and sharing in America. And we're going clear back to the early 20th century, perhaps even the 19th century, and then jumping forward to today and well into the future. What we're discussing with the editor of Outdoor Life magazine is both the history of that magazine and the role that it has played in American hunting and outdoor life, as well as where the future is taking us. And to help with this all is the current editor of Outdoor Life, Alex Robinson. Welcome to the show, Alex.
Hey, thanks for having me, Ron. Happy to be here.
Hey, it's my pleasure. I am really interested in discussing with you the things that I just intimated. How long have you been at Outdoor Life in one capacity or another?
So I started in at Outdoor Life as an intern in 2008. And I've been working full-time at Outdoor Life since 2010. So I guess that's like 14 years.
And when did you become the editor?
I've been the editor-in-chief now for almost 5 years.
Almost 5 years. When you became editor, was that when the transition went from a paper magazine to the all-online stuff?
Yes. That was under my tenure. So I'd been the editor-in-chief for about a year. And then we came under a new ownership. This was in 2020 during like the heart of COVID. And the new owners were really digital focused, not just digital first, but kind of digital only. And they decided it was the best for the business to close the print product and focus solely on digital publication. So we started doing that in 2020, and it's been all online since then.
Before I get back to the good old days and the magazine we all waited for every month and loved, I'd like to maybe ask you what advantages you are seeing right now with this digital platform. Do you see a bunch of things that are better, do you think, for reaching out to the community and getting the communications flowing more effectively?
Yeah, there's a ton of advantage for focusing only on digital. There's some disadvantages too, which we can talk about that. But on the pros side, we're able to publish a lot more content. You know, the publication process for an online story is so much swifter and more streamlined than it ever was for print. So we're able to respond really quickly to new trends, news stories, new gear items. We can cover that stuff so much faster than we ever could. We can also cover a lot of different types of stories that we never would have been able to cover in print, because in a print magazine, you're limited by the number of pages per issue. You know, in our quarterly, back in the quarterly days, it was 100 pages of edit per issue. So I could publish whatever I want as long as it fit in those 100 pages. And there might not always be space for, some of the quirkier, maybe less popular topics. So we really ended up focusing on, a lot of deer hunting, a lot of bass fishing, all the stuff that, everyone knows and loves. And there were great stories, but now we can be much more creative with the types of stuff we cover. And then, Ron, a writer like you can appreciate, I don't have to cut your copy in half in order to get it to fit into a story. Now, as long as it's a strong story, as long as every paragraph is doing some work, I don't have to just cut words simply to get them to fit into a space. We can run a story as long as it needs to be, as long as we want it to be, as long as it's doing some good work for the reader. So we're publishing stories that are way longer than they ever would have been in print, which is kind of counterintuitive. A lot of people think, everything online is like short and quippy, and that's not really true. A lot of our digital stories are much longer than the old print versions would have been, simply for space.
Yeah. Now, Alex, if you go back longer than you've been around, and even longer than I've been around, but I could remember in the 1960s, there would be 3,000 words to as many as perhaps 5,000 word stories in Outdoor Life magazine. So imagine what it was back in the 18 or the 1920s. Speaking of 18, when did Outdoor Life start publishing?
So we celebrated our 125th anniversary last year. So we are now 126 years old. The official date is
That would have been
1898.
1898 then, huh?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, yeah. And to my recollection, in the middle of the 20th century, I think Outdoor Life was the number one. We had the big three: Field Stream, Sports Afield, Outdoor Life. There were a few other
Yes.
magazines, but those were the big ones. Yeah. Do you know what the peak, when you were publishing, what the peak subscription was?
I don't know the peak. By the time I came around in 2010, print was already on the decline. So I had kind of missed. I mean, to be honest, Ron, you might have a little better insight into the glory days of print. By the time I came around, I had sort of missed those days where we were even doing an issue a month. By the time I started, we were doing 10 issues a year, just because that's what the advertising
Yeah.
dollars could support. So, I remember when I started, I think the subscription, the number of subscribers was somewhere around 1 million or so, and then it had kind of slowly dropped over time. But as you know, there's a lot of different ways to calculate a circulation number. And, if you read maybe some of the advertising materials of the time, circulation would have been, 10 million or some crazy high number. But the point, the original point that you're making, it is true. Outdoor Life was certainly one of the big three. More people were reading Outdoor Life in print than almost anything else related to hunting and fishing. And it really, really was considered, the kind of the standard for information about hunting and fishing at the time.
Yeah, the information was fairly limited. You intimated something about getting timely news reports in. Something breaks, you can get it out on your digital magazine the next day, I would imagine. Because of the looking forward, the progress of a publication, my goodness, even if it's once a month, that's about as fresh as you can be on news, just to probably be 3 months out by the time you got the news report in and you laid it out, you squeezed it into the magazine. It's pretty tough to be timely on any of that. So I think most of what happened with the magazines back in those days was inspiration. You would read a story because you were really interested in whitetail deer hunting or moose hunting or an adventure in Africa, and you probably needed a little stimulation. You got it from Outdoor Life. I mean, I can remember waiting at the mailbox for that magazine to come in every month because I just needed to get my fix. It wasn't like now where you could get online and just look endlessly 24/7 and find all sorts of information on hunting and fishing and watching videos. And I mean, we didn't even have any video stuff back in those days. There was an American Sportsman on television, and that might, I don't even think they ran an episode a week. So we were really hungry for some news and some stories about hunting and fishing. And Outdoor Life was just one of the standards to take us away from our humdrum lives and let us join the writer on an adventure and then project ourselves into it and perhaps get stimulated enough to lay some plans for a hunt of our own. And that's pretty much how it worked. So how does that change these days? Obviously, young people especially, anyone new to the game is probably pretty excited about doing these things, but you can get that information so much more quickly. Do you find that you publish perhaps more news items and gear reviews rather than adventure stories? Or are you still doing a lot of these incentive stories, the kind of things that fire people up?
No, I think it's true. I think we publish much more news and gear review content than the narrative hunting stories. And the reason why goes back to kind of what you all already articulated, which was the reader of a print publication that, and this is like, I'm stealing this from one of our old CEOs, who would like to describe things this way. The print reader is kind of a lean back reader. They're already decided they're going to read a magazine for a while. Maybe they've got their fireplace going, and they're sitting at home, and they want to sit back with, I like to think, a nice glass of bourbon, and they want to read some good hunting stories and think about their own nostalgia or their season to come. And as a kid, I didn't have the bourbon, but I would do that. I'd sit, I would sit in our living room, and I would read those stories, and my imagination would run wild. And I was kind of just ready to take in whatever the magazine would deliver to me. Readers today, on digital platforms, they're either scrolling, just looking for something interesting to occupy them. So that's where the news comes in, right? You want to have some kind of grabby headline that is interesting to enough of your audience that as they're scrolling through Facebook or Instagram or Apple News or whatever platform they like to use to scroll through to get their news, you show up and your content is interesting to them. So there's the scrolling audience, or there's the search audience. And those are the folks who are trying to figure out how to do something. They're trying to figure out what to buy. They're trying to figure out where to go. So that sort of information is really, like, I like to think of it as service journalism. We're answering the questions that we know our audience has, and we're applying, our very best efforts and knowledge and research to give them the best answers. So that's gear reviews, how-to information, the where to go stories, stuff like that. And then there is still, and this is our most dedicated audience, there is still that lean back audience who will bookmark Outdoor Life and check our website, once a week and see what interesting stories are there, or they'll follow us. I think a lot of these people end up reading Outdoor Life, maybe on their iPad, and they're looking for, in my experience, those people are looking for more in-depth narrative stories. So we do still provide those, and as long as I'm editor, that will always be kind of a part of our, content strategy, but really part of our ethos, to take readers to places and kind of share that excitement and share the adventure with them and get them to feel inspired. But the magazine was almost, at certain points, the magazine was almost all that. That was almost every story was trying to do that.
Yeah.
Now it's
I
maybe
remember that.
10% of our content over the course of a week. Maybe we have one or two stories, maybe two or three stories that are really narrative pieces. And we're publishing, say, 30 stories a week. So yes,
Yeah.
it's changed.
Yeah, Alex, I'm now that you mentioned it, I noticed this back when I was younger, doing the same thing with you without the bourbon, but the magazine, and just gobbling it up and reading everything and planning my future hunts and fishing trips and everything else and getting inspired. But I noticed, looking back even farther in the early days, it was almost all that sort of me and Joe went hunting, here's our inspirational story or a funny story or a tragic story or whatever it was, almost no how to.
Right.
And I just was thinking as you were talking, why wasn't there a lot of instruction back in those days? And I think the answer is that stuff came from your family, your father, your cohorts, your community, because we were more rural then. And I think most of us just lived in a hunting and fishing and outdoor environment, while these days I think the vast majority of us are just the opposite. We're in suburbia or we're in a city. We haven't grown up with wild game right outside of the door, including predators taking our livelihood, deer in the cornfield and coyotes in the chicken house and all these things that we would have grown up with back in those days. So we didn't learn by doing and having adults in our lives who were doing, who could then instruct us. I still think that's a great way to do it. But in the absence of that, I could see significant value in what you're doing now with your online stuff. Not only can you read the instructions, which is difficult for a lot of us to comprehend, or look at some photos, number 1, number 2, and number 3, showing specific parts of the whole thing. We can watch the actual video and get all of that material. So I think you're doing a great service as an instructor and a teacher that we wouldn't have gotten from a print
Yeah.
magazine.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Ron. I like to think of it that way as well. And the other thing is that we take a lot of pride in is we are, we're an independent publication. So we're going to review products, and whatever product does the best in our testing, that's what wins the Editor's Choice Award. You can't buy your way. You can't advertise your way into the winner's circle of any of our reviews. So I do think that is really valuable, just from a reader standpoint. Is we're trying to build a reputation of doing really in-depth gear reviews that is independent and that you can trust. So kind of what we
That's a great point, Alex.
yeah what we kind of have given up in the realm of inspiration, with those big hunting stories and the tales that you and I both read as throughout our lives. Hopefully we've replaced some of that with this like reader service, which we find just in very high demand today. There's so much information out there. Like you said, you can if you want to, you can be over inundated with hunting and fishing content all day long. But not all of that content is created equal. Not all of it is expert. Not all of it is even vetted or edited. So we try to, in this world of an unlimited amount of content, we try to make sure that ours is of top quality.
That is refreshing to hear and know, because back in the bad old days, if a certain manufacturer was pouring advertising dollars into a magazine, that is what the writers were asked to write about. Yes. If you were going on a hunt, say to Alaska, they said, make sure you use brand rifle this and not that, because that doesn't advertise with us, but this does. So the readers were not getting an unbiased report. And you see the same thing on social media these days, or in a lot of online platforms. You don't know if that individual has been sponsored by, bought and paid for by somebody, necessarily or not. You're supposed to announce that sort of thing. But specifically what you guys are doing, that is a good point, because if you don't have those kinds of obligations to your advertisers or sponsors, you can give folks the real story, what that scope or binocular or rifle actually did. So I think the reader is getting a great service from you in that regard.
Yeah, and if you think about it, in the magazine days, maybe the bad version of the old days, I think publishers had to do that to keep the lights on at the place. That's the revenue. That's the major revenue stream for a print publication, was advertising. Now, obviously, you have the subscription dollars coming in, but oftentimes the subscription dollars were kind of only paying the cost that was required to print and circulate the magazine. And then the advertising dollars is really what the company is relying on for their revenue and profits and all of that stuff. Our business model online is different now. We still take direct advertising, and we still, definitely rely on that and want to have good partnerships in the hunting and fishing industries. But a new and major revenue source for us is through commerce affiliate linking. So say, for example, we do a review on the best bass fishing lures. And in our review, we link to Cabela's and Amazon and all these places where you can buy each of the lures that we're reviewing. If a reader clicks on that lure and purchases, we earn a small commission from that purchase. So the incentive for us as the writers, as editors of this piece, is to have the single best story on best bass fishing lures ever created, so that we get the most amount of eyeballs on it, and that we have the best products picked as the best products so that people will actually trust us and go buy them. If we run crap, if we run bad picks, or if our story isn't trustworthy, then people aren't going to buy the products and we don't make any money. So I like this environment where the best content wins, not only audience, but also revenue. And under this framework, we've been able to be really successful.
Yeah, it's a meritocracy in publishing. How do you like that?
Yeah, who would have thought?
Say, if I want to change directions here a little bit and appeal to a lot of our listeners who are interested in the industry. I will fairly often have folks on who have careers in the outdoor world. And I know a lot of young people especially would love to have my job or your job or some job that got them into the out of doors. What are the opportunities for someone working for something like Outdoor Life? How would someone begin publishing with you, and can they get paid for writing for Outdoor Life today?
Yeah, that is a good question. After my answer, I'm going to throw it back to you with a question, because I think you probably have some really good insight here too. But yes, you can still be paid as a writer for Outdoor Life. We have a good stable of freelance writers that we use all the time. I think it is very hard to break into these days, but if you are able to prove yourself as a quality, reliable, knowledgeable writer, I can load you up with work. I have plenty of work for folks like that, but there is less time, I think, than there used to be to train up a freelance writer, to kind of coach someone, go back and forth with someone on story ideas, or final copy. There's just, because we publish so much more than we ever used to, there's not the amount of time to spend on any individual story. And what that means for a freelancer is, if you can't get with the program, you can't work with us. If you don't turn your stuff in on deadline, you're out. If you can't write coherent copy, if you can't write interesting copy, if you don't get the assignment, you're out. You're not going to get another opportunity, because the writers that we work with can do all those things. They are professionals. They keep their deadlines. They do all the things that the editors expect of them, and they end up getting the most work, sometimes more work than they can even handle. If you want to break into this, I think the opportunity is there, but maybe don't come to Outdoor Life right out of the gate. Maybe, work for some other, maybe more local or regional publications, get some experience, kind of find your path as a freelance writer, and then come to us when you're, ready, because you're probably only going to get one chance. It sounds tough, but that is the reality. My question back to you, Ron, is, do you see it that same way? I know you're kind of, you're doing a lot of your own content these days, but I imagine you still kind of have a foot in the freelance world. How do you see it? Like, what's out there in terms of writers? I think the video and social media side is kind of a separate thing. But what do you make of the freelance writing landscape?
Good question. I still do a little, but when I stopped doing a lot, I was still pretty much inundated with requests. So it wasn't an issue of, gosh, I don't have enough work. I had plenty of work. The pay rates weren't necessarily the greatest, but you could always make it up with volume. Right. If you wanted to do volume.
Right.
And even back in my heyday in the 80s and 90s when I was cranking out volume, you made a decent living, but you weren't going to get rich. but you were having a heck of a good time staying poor.
Yeah.
So, but the interesting thing about when the internet really started to take off is there were so many companies that needed content for their websites. And they would say, hey, we really need you to write something about some basic aspect of hunting or fishing that I would have thought most people knew, but realized fairly quickly that a lot didn't, and they wanted it, so why not? So you could crank stuff out rather quickly, and they would give you anywhere from $50 up to sometimes even $1,000, depending on how hungry they were. Well, if you can find enough of those higher paying markets and they need a new piece every week, you could do a pretty good job of feeding yourself and your family and paying your bills.
Yeah.
Now, I haven't been working for those websites for several years now because we're so busy with the podcasts and YouTube channels and everything. But I would certainly recommend that anyone wanting to get into this line of work to investigate that. Check out your favorite website from your favorite manufacturer, whatever the gear is. And then if you notice that they have a blog site with a lot of articles and reports and stuff in there, contact them and see what they're paying and if you could maybe work for them. Learn the ropes. A lot of those will let slip a little bit of a grammar issue or spelling or something that you would never let through the outdoor life. But great place for that training ground you were mentioning. Yeah. But the greater thing I would urge our younger listeners to pay attention to is their personal development as communicators. I think this is a big falling in our education system to not emphasize communications. And I know the high school kids especially are going to roll their eyes and groan and say, you mean I have to pay attention in English class? If they still have English class, I don't know. But my point is, if you can effectively communicate, whether it's the written word or a film, more likely communicating like this, just speaking clearly without a lot of and you know what I mean? Like, it's like, it was like that.
Yes.
Like that's not going to cut it. You're not going to sell an article full of like that. You have to know how to communicate. So if you are a student, apply yourself and learn that basic skill. I like to say it's dog dumb. Dogs know how to communicate pretty effectively. Yeah. One dog meets another dog, and if you don't want to have a fight, you better know how to communicate in dog language. Well, our job is to learn to communicate in the human language, whichever one you're using. So that's kind of my take on it. But yeah, I do think that anyone, young or old, with some experience and some communication skills can make a decent living as an outdoor writer, communicator in one field or another, and or at least a nice avocation that earns you enough money to take a trip maybe to Alaska or Africa every year or two or something like that. So
yeah,
go for it.
Yeah. I think one thing that I left out too is there is a need for category experts. So someone who is really spun up, truly an expert on crossbows, for example. If you have been working for years at learning everything there is to know about crossbows and have established yourself as the crossbow guy, you could do a lot of writing based off that experience. And you don't even have to be a great writer, because I'll happily work with someone who is truly a content or category expert and work with them on their writing and cleaning up, basic grammar and sentence structure and things like that. I can fix all that stuff, but I am not a crossbow expert, so I can't add that knowledge to any sort of story. If that can come from the writer and then I can work on the copy with them and they're open to that, that's another way in. That's a great way into the industry. And I think a lot of folks sort of get confused about whether they're an influencer or whether they're a writer, and do they want to go the influencer route and rely on, industry sponsorships for their revenue, or do they want to go more the writer route and rely on publications to pay them freelance rates? I think it's a complicated landscape for folks trying to figure that out. I don't have great answers to that. I've seen folks be successful in either route, And some folks who have been successful in sort of a hybrid route where they're influencers who also write editorial content. So I don't think there's one answer, but I do know that if you want to really be successful, you have to be a good communicator, like you said. You have to stick to your obligations. You can't burn people, and you have to be truly knowledgeable about the thing that you're saying you're knowledgeable about. If you're pitching a story on hunting whitetail deer in Texas, you better be a real expert, or you better have really good interviews with the folks who are, because there's so many people out there who are really knowledgeable, and anything that you can imagine, there's an expert on it somewhere. And my job as the editor is to find those folks and, try to access their information. So yeah, there's nothing that I dislike more, maybe other than blatantly missing deadlines and not communicating them, than someone who is posing as a category expert who isn't, because that makes my job nearly impossible.
Boy, yeah, Alex, the history of outdoor writing in magazines and other places, it's just rife with those posers.
Yes.
Some of them who were pretty successful. Remember that story? They made a movie about some guy who would pose as a doctor and a pilot and all these crazy things and pull it off, scam lots of money and stuff. Similar things were going on in the outdoor writing world. There was a guy who was putting himself up to be the world's greatest trophy mule deer hunter or something. And he was published and published again, and he had seminars, and then came out years later that he was cheating the whole time. He was gluing antlers together, I guess, and shooting deer out of season and all sorts of things. And ouch, that's a stain on the publication, which kind of took his word for it. But it's a stain on the whole hunting field, all of us. It's like we're putting out characters like this. And then that spilled over. There were whitetail hunters doing it. There were elk hunters doing it. And yeah, that's the kind of inauthenticity that you are not looking for. What Alex is wanting, folks, with authentic writers who know their stuff, who know their crossbows, is just that. You have to be genuine, authentic, not braggadocio, not trying to sneak one past anyone, because it's not doing you any favors, it's not doing your editor any favors, and it's certainly not doing your readers or listeners any favors. So develop the expertise first, and then be honest. Even at my age, with my experience level, there are plenty of things I don't know, and one thing I have learned, though, over the years is not to pretend I know when I don't know, because there is someone out there who does know, and they're going to pull me up short.
Yes.
So and I think that's great advice, Alex.
I think to the story you had of the old person impersonating a trophy mule deer hunter, those folks today will get found out so much faster because of social media and comments and all the ways that you can call into question someone's authenticity or experience. Back in the day, you had to write a letter to the editor, a handwritten letter or typed out letter, mail it, hope they get it. Whatever that response time is, it could be months or years until the person is found out. Now it's a few Instagram comments, and all of a sudden it's like, let's look into this person's history. Wait, what were they doing? What year was that? And it can be discovered very quickly. So having true expertise is a huge advantage.
The downside, Alex, to some of that instant response stuff, though, is someone can bury someone else or cancel them with lies.
Yes.
And this has been known to happen in many fields. But, let's say someone takes exception to who you are and what you do, and they decide they're going to spread some nasty rumors about you. It can get ugly in a hurry and ruin someone's career, and that is a real downside to this internet communication stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. It's and it's just ugly to see.
Yeah, but you have an opportunity yet to vet some of that, do you not? Even though you can publish quickly, I would imagine if you get some sort of a spurious allegation or potentially spurious, you guys do some investigating of your own before you just cough it up, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially with new writers, we try to do just look into what they've published previously. We check them out on their social media pages and just get a sense of what they've written and where they've come from to hopefully avoid those issues. And we rarely have them, but when we do, and we have had them, um, but we look into everything, as deeply as possible before, yeah, trying to sink anyone's career. Because that
Yeah,
stuff, it's
well, that's good.
yeah, it's bad. It's
Glad
bad
to
when
hear
it
that.
happens. And it is definitely an ugly side of the internet business. And honestly, it's one that seems to be getting worse. I wish I could say that society has moved past that, but I don't think that it has. The internet comments today seem to be nastier and less productive than ever. Um, so we try to honestly
Hmm.
limit some of that. We don't have comments on our website stories anymore. So we try to keep the content contained to be about what it's supposed to be about and limit the nastiness that anyone would have to wade through in order to get to the useful information. But it's hard to do in this world of internet. I mean, I'm sure you see this on your own YouTube pages and Instagram.
Alex, I want to bounce back to something. You mentioned the expert in, say, crossbows.
Sure.
Getting back to folks who want to get into this line of work and whatnot, all, do you offhand have a bit of a list of some of the topics that don't have very many experts that are sort of in need of finding them that people could work toward?
Thermal optics, fastest growing category that we know about or that we have involvement in today. And there are very few experts out there on them. We have one of them, Andrew McKean, but he's kind of one of one. So thermal optics is a very fast, very interesting, kind of wild west of a category. I think other places, traditional gun writing, there's a great crop of gun writers out there, but it doesn't seem, at least what I've been able to find, it doesn't seem like there's a group of younger generation gun writers coming up behind them. So I really
Hmm.
wonder what's going to happen there. It seems like a lot of the younger folks who are interested in covering firearms gravitate toward YouTube. Um, but there's still a need for gun writing. So where's the next crop of gun writers going to come from? And I'm talking about folks who can
Ah.
just provide a very good review of the new deer rifles of the year, or can evaluate fairly
Hmm.
and test a waterfowl hunting shotgun. I'm not seeing a lot of folks in their 20s and 30s who are able to do that effectively right now. So
Hmm.
that is a huge area that really powers the entire hunting industry, gun reviews and gun evaluations. And on at least on the writing side, I don't see a ton of new folks coming into it. I don't know. What do you see, Ron? Do you think
Oh,
that's true
good.
as well?
No, yeah, now that you mentioned that, I was several years ago thinking sort of the same thing. You see the old guys in the publications as well as online, and you know they're experts. You've been reading them all your life, but you don't see that many new names pop up. So we were discussing that at a shot show a couple of years ago. This, where are all the young gun writers going to come from? So there's an opening for you. Anybody out there listening who loves to hunt and shoot, really start boning up on this stuff and becoming an expert, and you might have yourself a career as a 21st century gun writer. Talk to
Yeah.
Alex. He signs the checks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, this gives us a little hope for the future. Uh, to help us run out this segment, though, Alex, what are your thoughts about the future of the outdoor life in America? Where do you think it's going? What do you think it's going to look like in, say, another quarter century?
Oh, wow. Now, when you say outdoor life, do you mean our publication specifically, or do you mean hunting and fishing in public lands in America?
I think just the whole gamut, outdoor life in America, not the magazine, not the online magazine, the hunting and fishing life that outdoor life
Yeah.
covers. What is going to be,
Yeah.
what's going to be happening with all of us deer hunters and bass fishermen in 25 years?
Well, I think there's a lot of different potential outcomes. Um, some of the things that I see that should be concerning to us are, a continued movement among the anti-hunting groups to infiltrate wildlife management and wildlife management policies. Um, you
Mm-hmm.
look at some of the things going on in Washington State. You look at the attempts to ban mountain lion hunting in Colorado. Um, there's a concerted effort to chip away at hunting opportunities in a lot of either blue or purple states, and they can do that through um, ballot initiatives and also the legislative process. So that it will be interesting to see if that continues in intensity. Now, there's always been anti-hunting efforts. Ron, I'm sure you can recall some of the more outrageous stuff by PETA and organizations of that nature in the past. But what's concerning to me and to many of the folks covering this stuff now is that they seem much more organized and they seem to be promoting a message that doesn't sound extreme. The message that they're putting out there is basically if we limit the amount of human involvement, then we don't actually need hunters to manage wildlife. If we have more predators on the landscape, natural predators like wolves or cougars or coyotes or whatever, then we don't really need hunters out there managing our deer populations. And, isolated and pitched this way, that is not extreme. That doesn't sound extreme to someone who doesn't know anything about hunting or the North American model of wildlife conservation. That sounds good. Natural processes should take care of themselves. Um, you know, we know, and I think probably most or all of your listeners know that that's not realistic. We live on a landscape that already has been impacted by man, and we need to manage the wildlife and resources that we have out there. And hunting is that. It's wildlife management, and it's also the thing that funds all of our public lands. But that message is not getting out there as clearly or as loudly as this anti-hunting message.
Yeah.
So that's a big one for all of us to keep our eye on as we go forward. Um, on the positive side, I think there's a lot more interest in hunting, fishing, general outdoor stuff. I think there's potentially less conflict between groups that were maybe seen at odds in the past, like backpackers and hunters. I think you can look at fishing numbers overall and see that there was a huge boom in the number of folks buying fishing licenses during COVID, and those numbers have kept going strong. I think there's a lot of kind of relation between anglers and hunters. I don't think it's a big step to go from, oh, I'm really interested in fishing. Oh, I like having these fish fries. Oh, well, one of the guys I fish with is into deer hunting. Maybe I'll go tag along with him one day. Um, so I think there's a lot of positive energy of new people coming into hunting and fishing, and that's really exciting to me. Um, one thing that those folks are bringing is a lot of new technology with them. Um, and that's going to be another thing that all of the hunting and fishing world is going to have to kind of grapple with. I mentioned thermal optics. Where's the place for those products in hunting? Cellular trail cameras in deer hunting and big game hunting, forward-facing sonar and fishing, drones, thermal drones for recovering deer. There's always been a lot of technology in hunting, but now the technology is moving at a faster pace and it seems a little more sci-fi than what we've been using in the past. Ron, especially you, like back in your old days. So the technology available to us now is much different than what it was when you started. So we're going to have to decide how much technology we want in hunting and fishing and balance that love for technology with fair chase ethics and, our kind of traditional perspectives on hunting.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective, and I thank you for that, Alex. We obviously will wait and see. You'll probably see a lot more of it than I will, but I think we're going to have to make a decision at a crossroads at some point, because there are always more and more of us, less and less wild lands on which we can do these sorts of things. I have a hunch, though, we're going to get a little bit back to organic use of the outdoors, sustainable use of fish and wildlife resources. I think the public at large, if they will dive into this and get educated, will realize that the only way human animals can live with all the rest of the animals on the planet is to utilize those resources the same as every other animal does. Cougars and wolves depend on deer and elk for dinner. Humans depend on elk for dinner as well. It's just a sustainable, cyclic use of the natural world. And turning all the natural world into chemically made meat in a laboratory is not the solution. So I do have hope for the future, and I think given the limited approach or the limited opportunities that young people have for getting out in nature, is going to help drive sort of a revival of it, sort of what we saw in the 1960s as the Mother Earth movement, where folks at my age were thinking, we need to get back to the way the grandma and grandpa did it, closer to the earth, closer to our food sources, more real, rather than just waiting for somebody to deliver it to us. I think that's going to happen again on a larger scale. And I certainly hope so for the future of hunting and fishing and all of our natural resources. My biggest concern is always the wildlife, the wild places. Second is my right to utilize those. And third is keeping publications like Outdoor Life alive so I can make a living telling folks about it. So I think Ron, you're probably in the same boat. Yeah. Do you have any last words of wisdom for everyone before we sign off here?
Man, words of wisdom. Good question. I would say that as you consume media and as you kind of just in your everyday life, think about the publications and the informational sources that you're getting your content from. And if you are happy with those publications, if you feel like they're doing a good job, do your best to support them. Subscribe, follow them, even something as small as, leaving a positive comment. All of that stuff goes a very far way in supporting our business. And especially online, most of this content is free to you. I realize there's pesky ads, website ads. Nobody likes those, but that's how we stay in business. That's how we pay for the content. So if you like any podcast or YouTube page or website, just do whatever you can, even if it's a free way. Just do whatever you can to support that publication. And if you are seeing stuff you don't like in any given publication or podcast or YouTube, send that place a message. Send Letters and Outdoor Life an email. We will read it. As long as you do it thoughtfully and have some coherent points and sound like a decent human being who wants to have a conversation, we will engage with you. I'm really interested in hearing what readers think about different things and different ways that we're covering stuff. I want to know. And if you sound like an intelligent, coherent person, I 100% will engage with you. So just keep that in mind. We want to hear from you. There's a ton of smart people out there. We have a ton of smart readers. Ron has a ton of smart listeners, and we love to hear from you guys.
Boy, I just can't add much to that, Alex. That's a great way to sign off, folks. Alex is absolutely right. We try to do that here at Ron Spomer Outdoors. More than open to criticism. If we screw something up, we always like to find out about it. We do like it when it's a little bit nicely put rather than calling us names and such. That just doesn't further the conversation. But none of us are perfect, and we are all trying to not only learn but share what we've learned to the benefit of us, to our heritage as hunters, and the future of hunting, and most importantly, the future of all the wild things and wild places we love that drives this whole industry. So kudos to you. I can back you up, Alex, on this by saying I have found, with the knowledge I've piled up over the years, when I read a review from Outdoor Life, these guys know what they're talking about. I am always impressed with the levels you guys go to find out the best scopes and rifles and ammunition and you name it. You are obviously not just pulling this stuff out of an ad agency's budget. You are doing the hard research and providing some good, useful information. So give Outdoor Life a look, folks. I think you're going to be impressed with what they're doing today. It's a lot different from the good old Outdoor Life of my youth, but I think it's still a valuable service, and I'm so glad that it's still out there. Alex, thanks for joining us here on Ron Spomer Outdoors Podcast. We may give you a call down the road again, get some more insights into what's going on in the outdoor life. Until next time, everyone, I want to thank you for joining us, and we thank Alex for joining us especially. We will see you next time on Honest and Shoot Straight.